Welcome to a component overview and organization video for Anachrony. My goal in this video is to orient you to the overwhelming number of components that come with the base game and the various expansion content for this game, and allow you to understand what is used for what. I'm not going to go into great detail following the very excellent packing instructions that came with the Infinity Box. I will be using the Infinity Box trays as an example, but we'll try to talk about what's needed for what purpose so that if you are just organizing your own game without the Infinity Box trays, you'll know how to put things together in a way that makes sense. For the base game, for boards, you will need the main player area board, the capital city board, for either the 2 or 3 player side or the 4 player side. You will also need the impact evacuation tile that fits in the center of the board here and flips over when the impact happens. And then the base game also comes with your 4 player boards, one for each of the 4 factions or paths. So for each faction, you'll need a bunch of components for playing the base game. You'll have your path banner in its stand that's going to mark your path as the first player when that's appropriate. And then you'll have 9 of the base game warp tiles, 3 basic resources, neutronium, the 3 basic worker types, an exosuit, and water. And there are 2 extra hex tokens for each path that go with the expansions if you're trying to sort the Infinity Box. And then there is a morale marker and a time travel marker for each faction. The cardboard components, there are enough in the Infinity Box to have each faction have one set of these markers. If you have the resin upgrades, there are only 4 of those sets, so that's enough for each player. So just know that if you put the resin ones in the faction boxes, you may have to go digging for them later. There are 8 of each faction token, 6 in the base game of the Exosuit hex markers. These you will not need if you have the minis. Each faction has a player aid and 2 leader cards, and then finally the path board, which has an A and a B side indicated up here. Note that in the Infinity Box and in recent printings of the game, these 2 leader cards and this path board are replacements for the old ones. The old leader cards had different artwork, and if you end up with both, the new ones are indicated by this wrench symbol on the back. Similarly, the path board that is new has a wrench symbol. These were rebalanced specifically, I believe, for the Fractures of Time expansion, but they work even just with the base game. And I believe that if you get the new Essentials Edition, you just get these new versions. So you can keep the old versions or discard them as you see fit. So if you have the original Commander pack or the new Miniatures pack or the Infinity Box, you will also have 6 miniatures for the faction, which again replace these Exosuit hex tokens. So in the Infinity Box organizer for each faction, you will have your materials here. If you have the upgraded warp tokens, they can fit in on top of the cardboard ones. I find these ones a little bit sharp on the hands, so I'm leaving the cardboard ones in here in case players prefer that. Note that the shape of these sections for the miniatures for each faction are slightly different. So Path of Progress, you can look for this little point for the wing. And once you've sorted out what goes where and have stuff in the boxes, it's going to be easier to find the right one to put them back in. And then your faction banner fits in this very nifty spot right there. Your leader card and player aids will fit in that spot. And then your path board will fit on top like a lid, and some of them you need to rotate the minis slightly to get it flat. And again, note that these hex tokens have been replaced by the miniatures. There is a space for these in the Infinity Box, but they have moved over to a different location. I'll cover that when I get there. So for mine resources, you have the 3 basic types and neutronium, and you're going to have your option on components. These cubes are the original colors from the original version of the game. I believe they have changed the colors for readability on the plastic cubes, so you'll see slightly this is more black, that is much greener in the new versions. There are also, and always have been, these cardboard versions of the components that both have the colors and also a pattern on them, so they assist with colorblind friendliness, and also they're just much more readable from the board. So some people much prefer the cardboard tokens. And then finally there are the new metal cubes. I did not order the basic resource metal cubes, but they exist, and they also have the same pattern on them as the as those cardboard ones do, so they're legible in that way, and they're very nice, so I may have to get the other metal cubes. To assist with legibility, particularly with these two when they're both on the board, I find it hard to see. I found these fabulous little ceramic bowls at a craft fair and purchased them, so I can very easily see now which ones are green and which ones are gray. I also have ones for gold and neutronium. And I'm happy to report that these actually fit into the infinity box. So when you're going to put the mine resources into the mine tray, it's technically possible, at least with the cubes that I have for neutronium and the cardboard and the metal, to put all of them into the bin, but it is very tight. So I'm going to choose to put just my cubes into this tray, and then I'm going to store all of the cardboard tokens in a baggie in the bin in the infinity box that is meant for odds and ends. In case there are players that have difficulty with the cubes, then we can pull them out, but I'm not planning to use them on a regular basis. And to cover the rest of the mine box, we have the resources, we have water. Note that different versions of the game come with different numbers of the 1 and 5 water droplets. They're not meant to be piece limited, they just included as many as they think you need to play that particular version of the game. And then the energy cores, and as you can see there's plenty of space if you have the resin energy cores as well. So the workers and breakthroughs for the base game are going to be your scientists, engineers, administrators, and geniuses. And then your breakthroughs, there are 5 different breakthrough symbols, and then each breakthrough has triangular, circular, and square breakthrough shapes. So it is easiest either, it's built this way in the infinity box, but if you're organizing your own components, it's easy if you sort them by symbol, because then it's easy to find the shape that you need, but sometimes it's hard to root through all the circles to try to find the right symbols. So that is the breakthroughs. Components. The buildings, you will have 4 different types of buildings. Each building is the 100s, 200s, 300s, 400 series. They're each numbered from 1 to 15, so 1 to 115, 2 to 201 to 215, etc. And then you'll have a stack of anomalies, which are all identical. Not to be confused if you have the full set with the variable anomalies expansion that I'll get to in a bit. So these are the base buildings. Next you'll have victory point markers in 1s and 5s. You'll have a -3 victory point marker that will come out at the impact. You have paradox tokens. These are the upgraded plastic ones, but I also have the basic cardboard ones down here in the bottom. And then there are space blocker tiles that are just the same on both sides that again come into play in impact or sometimes during setup at certain player counts. And then finally you have the capital impact tiles. So these block the spaces in the capital after the impact happens. There are 5 for each type of action. So this is the recruit action. You will randomly take the number that you need based on player count to block the spaces. So there's 5 for recruiting, 5 for research, and 5 for the building spaces. Okay, so then we're going to have in the Essential Edition, you will get 9 double-sided timeline tiles. And the other side has the variable timeline, which is an extension that's in the base game or expansion variant. In the Infinity upgrade that comes with all of the modules and expansions, there are 3 additional ones of those, so there should be a total of 12. And then you'll have, of course, your impact tile, And I have also 3 of the Make Your Owns from the original game. I am not 100% sure that they are still including these, but I have those, so stick those in there. And then we have the base game super project tiles. There are 18 of them that go in there, and our paradox die and the 2 research die. Finally, we have the base game cards. We're going to have the mine setup cards, the recruitment setup cards, and those are going to go out on the board for use during the game. And then we'll have the end game victory condition cards, some of which they'll be randomized and some of them selected and put out at the beginning of each game for setup. And then these are the starting resource draft cards, which is a variant that comes with the base game, where folks can choose their starting resources, and those will fit in there in the infinity box. And the final base game component you'll need is your end game scoring pad. If you have the infinity box or the Fractures of Time expansion, you'll also have the Fractures of Time score pad, so you can see this little Fractures of Time symbol that will indicate that this is the score pad from the expansion. So as we're talking about expansion icons, we'll move on to the Doomsday Module. This icon here, the sort of half and half rising sun sort of icon, will indicate that the component is part of the Doomsday Module. So for the Doomsday Module, you will have this fold in half board. You will have level 1 and level 2 experiment cards. You will have the trajectory dice. You will have these trackers, one for Save the Earth and one for, actually that's Save the Earth, and the other one is Seal Your Fate, I think. And this one is an extra endgame victory condition card that is going to get shuffled into the possible endgame victory conditions if you're playing with this module. So locations in the infinity box. So for cards, this is going to get added to the endgame victory conditions. I'm going to leave it face to face with the other ones to keep it separate for now. These level 1 and level 2 experiments are going to go into this center section here. And I also have the Doomsday Enhancement Pack, which is a 10-card pack that was, I think, for sale on the BGG store. It has a cover card and this appendix and then 10 more level 2 experiments. So I'm going to put those with this as well, and they all fit. I do not have my cards sleeved, but as you can see there's plenty of space for sleeving. The board is just going to go with the boards, and then the organization does show that these tokens go in here. But since this is a tray that goes out onto the board during play, I don't really think I need to set up things for enhancements or modules in this tray. So I'm going to find a different place for those, but I'll talk about what I'm moving at the end of the video. And somehow I did end up with 2 copies of those, so I'm just going to keep those together for now. And then the trajectory dice, they're storing here. Again, not 100% sure it's the best place for them, but that's where I'm going to put them for now as instructed. So for the Pioneers of New Earth module, the symbol is this little orange raised fist, which you'll see on all of these components, indicating that they're part of this module. The first thing you will have is the board, which is a fold-out board same size as the Doomsday board that can go alongside your main board and has a space for sending workers, etc. And then you will have 5+ adventures, 10+ adventures, another endgame victory condition scoring card, an adventure die, and then this one card that shows the distribution of the different values of adventures in these decks. And then finally, for each faction, you're going to have an Exosuit upgrade board, which has the symbol very obviously on the back side of it, and on the front side has space to upgrade your exosuits. If you have Fractures of Time, you will also have one of these for the Path of Unity and one for the Chronossus. So in the Infinity box, the Exosuit upgrade board for your faction will fit with the leader cards and player aid. The adventure die is going to go in here with the trajectory die, at least for now. And then the rest of these things, other than the board, which is again going to go with the boards, are going to fit into the card tray. Again, endgame victory condition. I'm going to keep face-to-face with the base game ones there. And then this spot over here has a spot for the adventure cards. And you can either put them down below or up above. There's another module set of cards that's going to go in the other spot. The Guardians of the Council module comes with this Guardian board, and you'll note this little sort of robot face icon here, and here is the icon for Guardians of the Council. So the Guardian board, 1 endgame victory condition card, 6 miniatures, and then there are 6 hex markers if you prefer to use those instead of the miniatures. Putting away, again, we'll put our endgame victory condition card in our card box. As we're used to, the board is going to go with the boards, and then the miniatures are going to go in the faction board that is set aside for Guardians of the Council and the solo mode. So the Guardians of the Council tray is a faction tray like the ones we're used to. It is a little wider. It's got this well over here on the side, and it fits crossways in the Infinity box. The minis are going to fit as they normally do in the spaces provided. And then this space over here is the one I mentioned before, is where all of the hex tokens, the sort of alternates for the minis, are going to get stored. So your Guardians of the Council hex tokens are also going to go there. And then there's also plenty of space for the Path of Unity and the ones you'll need for the Chronossus. And then the rest of this tray is going to be used for solo mode materials, which we'll get to in a bit. So those were the modules and expansions that came with the base game or the original product line, or in the classic expansions module or box that is now available, which also includes this Future Imperfect expansion, which is a more recent release, which has 4 modules in it. Some of them are quite small, so I'll cover those first. Module 1 are the Neutronide buildings, and it just consists of these 4 buildings that have this little yellow lightning bolt symbol on them, and that is Module 1. And then Module 3 is also quite small, and it is the Quantum Loops module. It comes with these 8 cards that look like this. Each faction is going to have a new Quantum Loop warp token in both the cardboard, and then if you have the enhanced version, it will have the plastic version. And there's one of these for each faction. And then there is one new super project, also with the little Quantum Loop symbol right there on it. Module number 2 is slightly more involved. It's the Hypersync module, and is represented by this little exosuit in a recycle symbol. And it comes with this board that has 3 action spaces. It comes with 3 collapsing city tokens for those spaces. And then each faction is going to have one for each action Hypersync tiles. And finally, Module 4 is the Intrigues of the Council, and it has this symbol right here, sort of the 3 heads whispering on the sides. And there is this board that comes with this module. And then there are going to be 4 decks of mission cards, and each one of these decks is the same. You'll see how the backs are different here with the different layout of the arrows, and then each deck has cards number 1 through 8 that should be the same. So each player is going to get a deck of these cards for this module. And then in addition to these standard mission cards, there are also these emergency mission cards. And then each faction is going to have an agenda benefits card. They're for base factions, and this is from Fractures of Time for Unity. So these will be needed for the factions for this module. There are 4 additional buildings. You'll see the module symbol here again that will be added to the building stacks. 1 additional super project that will be added to the super projects, and there are 4 stands for active missions and collapsing city tiles for the worker placement spaces on the board. And then finally we have agenda tiles. There are the blue-backed agenda tiles, which are objective tiles, and you'll see they all look more or less the same on the front, but the blue ones are the objective tiles, and then the yellow tiles indicate the value of those objectives as they come out onto the board. So a quick tour of the Future Imperfect tray in the Infinity Box. We're going to have our agenda tiles, the blue-backed ones and the yellow-backed ones go here underneath the 2 super projects. 2 different types of buildings, the Neutronide buildings and the Intrigues of the Council buildings. We'll have the Hypersync tiles for the various factions. We'll have collapsing capital tiles for the modules that use those. We have our stands for our missions, so we have our basic mission decks, our advanced missions, and then our emergency missions, and then our hypersync cards, and finally we will have our agenda cards for the various factions that are going to go in on top here. So before we get into the main components of the Fractures of Time module, I just want to briefly cover the variable Anomalies module that's included with Fractures of Time. That includes 1 endgame victory condition card, these variable anomaly tiles, which are numbered with an X in the front, and then there are 4, 1 for each player, anomaly removal tiles. So for Fractures of Time, you will have a series of boards that come with the expansion. The first is the Valley board that sits out by the main board. It folds in half. It's the same height as the other module boards that we're used to, but it's a little wider. And then each of the paths, the 4 basic paths and the Path of Unity, will have a fracture device, which is the long skinny board, and then a fracture device upgrade board, which is the small square one. In the Fractures of Time, there are new materials for the original 4 factions. Each faction is going to get a new leader. They're going to get a new warp token that is this flex core, and I have here both the cardboard and the plastic ones. And then 8 glitch tokens in their player color, and these just go into the faction trays. If I can get it there to set. The glitch markers can go in with the path tokens there. The warp tokens go in where they go, and then the leader card can just be added with the other cards on top. So just a quick overview of the new Path of Unity. This tray is a little wider because these exosuits are a little wider across than the others, and it fits sideways in the Infinity Box like the Guardians of the Council tray. So it's going to have all of your standard things, 6 minis, the path board, the warp tiles, your banner, your path tokens, which look like this in this case, and your 8 glitch markers, your time travel and morale markers, and then your cards. So you'll have your 3 leaders, you'll have your player aid card, and you'll have your exosuit upgrade for the Pioneers of New Earth module. So with Fractures of Time, we're also going to introduce the operator worker type, which are these here, and they go in the last space in the recruitment and breakthrough tray. And then we also have flex cores, which are these here, which are what allow you to blink in the Fractures of Time expansion. And they're going to go into this large well here, and it is so large because if you have the upgraded ones, they're quite chunky, so those would fit in there in the mine tray. And then finally we have expired warp cores and expired flux cores, and there's a little spot for them in this tray here, right here. These are related to how the Chronossus functions for solo play, and I'm probably going to end up moving these to some place that's more specific for solo play, but this is where the Infinity Box guide tells you to put them. So cards for Fractures of Time are going to be these technology cards. They're going to be 2 new endgame victory condition cards, and then 4 new starting resource cards that do things like give you flux cores. Then there's also a deck of objectives for the solo game if you're playing with the Chronossus, and these are going to be instead of the endgame victory condition cards. So I'm going to put those with the endgame victory condition cards because you're only going to use one or the other. And I'm actually going to use these as a divider between my standard game ones, which I'll get to eventually. So the standard ones, and then the ones from the various modules that I've put face to face. I'm going to put the solo ones in between as an easy divider between ones I may use if I'm using modules and the ones I will always use. And the other cards, these are going to go in the other side of this card tray with the Pioneers of New Earth adventure cards, and then the draft cards will go face to face with the regular starting draft cards here in this tray. So on to the buildings that come with Fractures of Time. So first there are these B buildings. You'll see this is 215 from the basic game, and this is 215B that comes with Fractures of Time, which makes this free action just a little bit more specific. It basically does the same thing, but only when you're doing the build. These were rebalanced when they were doing Fractures of Time, but it has been said that they prefer playing with these even with just the base game, so you could swap them out. The issue being that they didn't want to have to redo all of the rulebook building descriptions for all of these. So just know that if you're looking up rules and you are using the base game rulebook, you'll have to also have the Fractures of Time rulebook handy for these replacement buildings. Then there is building 116 and 117, or 16 and 17 of each 100 series, that are specific to Fractures of Time and deal with, you know, operator-specific spaces or things that give you flux cores. And then these here are interlocking buildings, and these are the 18s of each 100 series. So the last of the Fractures of Time components are 9 new Collapsing City tokens for the 3 basic actions, an Exosuit Expansion Bay tile, has 2 water there. We've got the Era Zero tile. We have got the Flux die, which is also used for the solo mode, and the Glitch die. And then we're going to have some additional super projects that will come into the random selection if you're playing with Fractures of Time. So most of the odds and ends from Fractures of Time are going to go into this box, which is Layer 4A, for those of you following along in the guide. The new super projects will go in here. There's a spot for each of the 2 dice. The anomaly remover cart tiles are here, and then the variable anomaly tiles here. And then these are all of the new Fractures of Time buildings, the B replacement buildings, and the new ones as well. And then our Collapsing City tokens are going to go into the deeper hex-shaped spot, and our single Exosuit expansion tile will go there. The Era Zero tile fits over the top. Finally, we have the final player boards. We have one for the Path of Unity, and we have one for the Chronossus, which is going to lead us into our discussion of the solo mode. So if you have the original base game, in addition to the double-sided Chronossus Chronobot 2.0 board, you will have a Chronobot 1.0 board as well. If you do not have Chronobot 1.0 printed up, there is a print-and-play version of it available from Mindclash Games if you're interested, but it is no longer being printed in the board. But if you have these components, I'm going to cover them as I'm covering the new solo modes that come with Fractures of Time. So first of all, the Chronossus is going to come with some materials that would be familiar to you from the basic factions. They're going to have warp tokens, and these are the double-sided warp tokens. They have the Chronobot on one side and the Chronossus on the other. Note that if you have Chronobot 1.0, the printed version, you will have 8 warp tokens with just the Chronobot symbol on them. You no longer need those because you can just use the 8 on that side if you're playing with 1.0. And so I've just set those aside in things I'm taking out of my box. There are faction tokens. These are just needed for Chronossus, and there's only 4 of them. And then we have a morale marker and a time travel marker. And we will have our exosuit hexes that we really don't need to use if we are using the minis, and usually for the solo play, the Guardians of the Council minis get used. And then for expansions, we will have the Exosuit upgrade board for Pioneers of the New Earth, note the orange fist, and then for the Hypersync module, note the logo there for that, we'll need the Hypersync tokens for the Chronobot. So for the solo mode, you're going to need a set of command tokens and a die that will indicate which command token is moving in a loop around on the board for the action that the bot is going to take. So the Chronossus uses these sides with the patterns on it. The Chronobot 2.0 is going to use these sides that look like the ones that had from the Chronobot 1.0, but you'll note that here there are fewer of them, so the loops are tighter and it makes them a stronger opponent than 1.0, which was a little bit spending too much time doing too many different things and wasn't therefore as strong an opponent. This die is also not going to be in your game if you do not have the printed version of Chronobot 1.0. And this is the previously mentioned die that goes with Fractures of Time and is also used for other purposes if you're not playing solo. So to increase variability on the Chronossus option for solo play, there are these action tiles that go out on the board and just change up what the Chronossus is going to do and makes it compatible with the various modules for the game. So there are always these 3 basic ones, C1 through 3, and then you'll see the little module symbols, which hopefully are starting to look familiar to you. So these 2 would be added to the mix for the Doomsday Module, Pioneers of the New Earth, Guardians of the Council, the Hypersync Module, and then these here, this is numbers 4 through 6, and number 14 are with Fractures of Time. So all of the solo materials will go into the Guardians of the Council tray. The extra alternate hex tokens, if you want to use those instead of minis, go in there with the other factions. And then over here on this side, you're going to have your Chronossus action tokens, your double-sided warp tiles for the Chronossus and the Chronobot, all of the circular tokens, so the command tokens that we talked about, and then the 4 faction tokens, your Hypersync tokens, your trackers, and then your banner, your faction banner, which is double-sided for Chronossus and Chronobot. If you have Chronobot 1.0, you will have one of these that has this side on both sides, which you can either keep in here as well or discard, as you will no longer need it. And then you will put your Exosuit upgrade board there. So the things that I'm moving from where they are indicated in the storage guide are as follows. So the expired energy cores and warp cores that are meant to go in this little space, which if I were playing solo a lot would be a sensible place for them to be, but as I don't want players to be confused by tokens that they're not having to deal with during the game, I'm going to add these to the solo materials in the Guardians of the Council tray. Similarly, because this is a tray that is going to need to be out on the table during gameplay, because we'll need victory points and paradoxes, and then we'll need these materials when the impact happens, I'm just going to move things around a little bit. I'm going to take the -3 marker and put it with the collapsing capital tiles, because again that's what we're going to need when the impact happens. And these that are related to a module I'm going to take out, and instead I'm going to put the paradox die in there next to the paradoxes as just a place for it to live between rolls. So this tray here is going to be needed just for setup, and then we'll go back into the box. So I have decided I'm going to leave these dice that are needed for modules here in this spot as instructed, and then these the Doomsday Tracker markers I'm going to throw in there as well. It's not the best place for them, but it is something we'll need for setup for modules. And then this spot over here where I pulled out the paradox dice, I'm going to put in my resin time travel and morale markers because there aren't enough for one for each faction tray, but there are enough for each player, so we can pull those out during setup to give to the players if they want to use them. Also, if you have the Chronobot 1.0 die, instead of putting this where it's suggested in the guide, I'm going to throw this into the tray with all of the other solo components, just so that is all together. In the interest of giving each player what they need to play their faction, there are a few things I'm going to take out of the module boards and put into the faction trays. So the agenda cards, where there's one for each faction, and then these Hypersync tokens that also are faction specific, are going to go over into the faction tray. I also want to be able to direct new players to the right areas of their player storage so that they don't have to sort through a lot of components they don't know what they are. So in here with the path tokens, I've taken the glitch markers out, and I'm going to put my trackers in here so I can just tell people you'll need everything in here, and then this will be specific to expansion content for the faction, so I can just tell new players just ignore everything in here. And then after I put in the banner, the cards, I will put any expansion content behind the player aid, so the agenda card and the Exosuit upgrade board are going to go behind that, so I can tell people to ignore anything behind that card as they're unpacking their faction if I'm just teaching new people the base game. The other thing I'm going to add to this board, or to this tray, is the Fracture Device expansion board, and it will fit behind the path board here on top of the minis. If you're keeping the old versions of the path boards, you're not going to be able to put all of those things in here, but I'm just trying to clear some space for my little ceramic mine bowls, so want to get as many boards as possible into the trays as I can. And finally, just a brief word about the odds and ends tray that is here in the Infinity box. I have this that was extra on punch board in the version of the game that I got that I'm going to leave in there because I like it. There are also a bunch of sort of make-your-own tiles that came in the version of the game that I have, so I just have those bagged up and I will put them in here. And then, as previously mentioned, I'm going to put in my mine resources, the cardboard versions, in case folks are having trouble with the cubes. We can pull those out. And lastly but not leastly, I have a promo card for the game that came with David Turtzi's Pocket Dragon game, and it doesn't really quite fit in here, but it's flat enough that the lid will keep it securely in there, so I'm going to stick that in that spot. I want to do a little overview of putting the boards in at the top of the Infinity box. I have the trays layered in as instructed on the guide. Note when you put this lid on that one side has a cutaway and the other side doesn't. That is needed so that the various faction boards are going to fit in underneath this tray. Then I have all of the expansion boards are going to go in next, starting with the two largest, which are the Hypersync and Intrigues of the Council boards. I have the Guardians of the Council board, and then I'm going to have the Valley board from Fractures of Time, and the two boards from Pioneers of the New Earth and the Doomsday Module. Then for my tray, I'm going to put in my ceramic mine cups that I use out on the board. And then I have the Fracture Device, sorry, that got in there. The Fracture Device boards are fit side by side, kind of underneath those cups that I have there. Line those up, and then I'm going to put in all of my rule books and things that I'm keeping in the game, and my score pads. And then as the last thing, because it's the first thing that's going out on to the table, I have my main board and my impact board.